Rich, welcome to the show. It's Frank.
Hey, Frank, how are you?
It's so great to have you on. I was doing a lot of backstory before calling you on up. I went through the Bulwark. I went through how the Atlantic covered you. I even went through a lot of your own memo here, and I wanted to have you on a while ago. But I'm glad this is how it all worked out because so much more has happened from the first time that I found you out there. And let me just first start off in this way, Rich. The current year, we have two largely socialist parties. The Democrat Party is now nakedly Marxist. So it always astonishes me when rhinos, neocons, progressives, the media use Joseph McCarthy to warn against listening to people like you when they are living proof that McCarthy was right.
Correct. I think that's. I especially liked the Bulwark piece where Ron Radar said, I think his quote was something about me being more dangerous than Joe McCarthy.
Yeah.
That's a life goal. That's a life goal for somebody like me.
I have to imagine. You know, it's baffling here, but you know, of course, the reason why this article was even written is because the word is getting around that you have supposedly caught the eye of the president's consideration for a possible position at the Pentagon. Is there anything about that you can tell us about? Because, you know, that there's many that may be excited about that thought.
Still under consideration. It is true. The question largely becomes a political one where, the undersecretary still has to be approved, and there are some political machinations that the system has to go through. I've never stopped supporting the president. I've never stopped supporting the administration, whether inside or out. And, going into the election year, there's benefit in having me on the outside as well. There's more freedom of maneuver. You can speak on shows like yours, for example, talk freely to members of Congress and so on and so forth. So it's kind of 50 cents in one, half a dollar in the other. And we'll just kind of play it by ear as the summer rolls out.
Is this one of those things where you're looking toward a confirmation, a potential hypothetical confirmation prior to the election, or this would be something that would be like a first thing on the docket after November if he gets reelected?
I think it's the type of thing where if they get the current nominee, who is a guy named Tony Tata, into the position where I would be a direct report to him, it would probably be worth going in. But absent that taking place, I think the president needs all the fire support he can get out here in the public sphere. And, you know how the mainstream media is. They're not going to have somebody like me on. So I come on to programs like yours and try and get to the audience through sort of alternative pathways. So I appreciate the opportunity.
Oh, well, listen, I've been waiting to have you on for a long time, and I appreciate you being here. So I guess the other thing I would ask you as we move along here is your time that you spent on the National Security Council. We have, as just citizen observers of this entire thing, especially with impeachment, we've been able to really ascertain a little bit better than in the past just what kind of characters are on the National Security Council. Especially because they've been playing so much more of a role in these attempted takedowns. Lieutenant Colonel Vindman, who became a person of public interest over the last year. I'm afraid to hear the answer to this question, but does people like Vindman, do they embody what groups like the NSC are all about these days, or is he the proverbial exception or the bad apple?
It's a split. I mean, people ask me that often. I think probably 75% of the people that serve in the national security community are, generally speaking, good guys. The problem that you have is all of the incentives, all of the promotions are largely geared towards compliance with the politically correct narrative, compliance with the globalist mantra. The pseudo-socialist globalist milieu that kind of defines our senior leadership in the government today. And, we're 30 years now, 28 years, 30 years into it. The Bush administration didn't push back at all. It really began in earnest, I guess, latter part of George Herbert Walker Bush, and then under Clinton and Obama, it just ran roughshod. I mean, Obama was the first openly Marxist president. So, you think about what the selection criteria was for people to achieve, 2, 3, 4-star general, for example, or, director of an agency, or to make it onto the Supreme Court. I mean, you had to be with the Marxist program. And we're dealing with that now. I always saw the Trump election as a counter-revolutionary movement, right? I mean, he didn't pull Pennsylvania and Michigan and so on because he got all the Republicans to vote for him. He pulled because he got Americans to vote for him. And I think that's what you see happening right now, where the two-party system we have doesn't accurately reflect the body politic in the country. As the national populist movement is growing leaps and bounds and continues to do so, I think, we'll either jettison one of the parties at some point, or perhaps the two existing parties will merge and something new will have to form. But the hour's late here. I mean, we're staring over the cliff right now. We used to say we were on the 5-yard line. Well, now we're at first and goal from 6 inches. And I'm hoping that it has awakened not only the president but some of the national security people around him who, they focus just because of who they are and their experience base overseas. But we're worried about Chinese fishing rights in the South China Sea. Minnesota's being burned to the ground, and New York's being burned to the ground, and billions of dollars in damage are being done. I mean, it's you take care of the problem at home first. I'd really like to see more focus from the national security side put into what's happening domestically.
Oh, yes. Speaking on that there, too, you're talking a little bit about the electorate. I know that Dr. Robert Epstein, he's a Clinton voter, a supporter in the past, who came out yesterday, last year actually, around Thanksgiving, and gave that really or no, maybe it was at the end of the summer last year, but really, really deeply impactful study and data that he dug up to estimate that anywhere from 2 to 10 million votes are being impacted through subversive means just by search engine manipulation effect by Silicon Valley, by Google alone,
right. And
that those kinds of plans are definitely in play for 2020. He just came out the other day and said that they're going to try to make Donald Trump's presidency a blip in history. And now with that, and of course we have all of this mail-in voting stuff, and then you very precisely outline the kind of machinations of the media and how they work to subvert the American mind as well as the academy. What do you see going into 2020? Do you think are you confident in election security? Are you confident that there has been more people taking notice to where we're going over the last 4 years, that there's actually even more of a groundswell of support behind the president, or what do you think?
I think his base is probably a little bit frustrated with him because he has been a wartime president for the duration. I mean, it began the day he rode down the escalator, and he didn't. I don't think he knew that. I mean, I've met the man several times. I've briefed him a couple times. I don't think he realized the strategic nature of his election. Right? I mean, he thought it was relatively normal election cycle, perhaps a little bit edgy, and he kind of fed that himself. But he didn't understand the entire political dynamic and the concern of the MAGA voter in terms of the structure of their grievances, where the Republican Party had, since 2010, where the Tea Party began, the Republican Party had consistently betrayed its base. And so going into this election, I think there's some frustration by those same individuals who maybe haven't seen as much progress as they would have liked. And maybe they're questioning his ability to respond right now. But, he is truly at war with several of his own institutions, his own mechanisms of government, and this isn't a dictatorship. So, he does have to work with the Senate. And unfortunately, Mitch McConnell hasn't allowed him to make a single recess appointment in almost 4 years, not one, in 4 years. So he's got, numerous vacancies across these institutions. Some of the people he does have aren't completely on side with him. there are a lot of patriots I know inside these organizations, but they're buried down, at rank levels that are insignificant to be able to actually drive policy. As far as the Democrats, they've become, I think it was Lenin's party was the Social Democrats. Well, that's what we have here today. Vladimir Lenin would have recognized everything that we see happening today. And then, you throw in the international dynamic to this, which is China, and in particular, the international financiers that back China and their unification of the Eurasian landmass under their OBOR project, which is, for your listeners, the One Belt, One Road project, which is this massive effort to create a single market across the entire Eurasian landmass and then the parallel sea lanes to support it. That is what the president is up against. So what we heard during the Obama years was managed decline of the United States. Well, MAGA rejected that, elected Trump to stop it. He was being successful, and now we find ourselves in an evolving information, policy, political war with China, behind the scenes as well, and some of their financial backers. So it truly is what we see as manifest as COVID and riots has massive geopolitical implications as well.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you said that, because I think even though we haven't been able to really articulate it, I think that most people can see that there has to be a relation between all of those geopolitical situations and the one catastrophe after another that has been served up to us in 2020 alone. So, and it started with New Year's Day with Iran. So, it was right. That was just it. But you had mentioned something before about people inside that maybe are patriotic, but they don't have any kind of influence in driving policy. Getting back to this potential appointment of you inside of the Pentagon, let's say that you had the due influence given to you and you're in your post and you're ready to go. What would be a top priority of yours if you've given that influence? What's a top priority for you in trying to correct what you see as a major problem for at least just American governance?
I can pick some simple low-hanging fruit that would simply be the reversal of some of the things that happened under the Obama administration. And one of the big ones was in 2011. Then he was at the National Security Council working counter-terrorism. John Brennan ordered the Pentagon to effectively cease fact-based analysis as it pertains to the terrorism threat. We know who Brennan was, the Gus Hall voter, and you think about that and him being the director of the CIA. Well, you understand now, the CIA in and of itself has a massive counterintelligence breach. And if you remember back to the 80s and the 90s, just one spy being in situ at the CIA was enough to cause a crisis. And who knows how many witting leftist subversives have been brought into the agency under Brennan's leadership, right? Just as an example, one of the things I'd like to roll back is the Obama folks under Brennan's leadership purged all training, all information operations, and all intelligence analysis of anything fact-based related to Islam. So you weren't allowed to consider their own doctrine in understanding your adversary. And that's how you get into 19 years now in Afghanistan with no clear strategic end state. And so there are simple things like that, and then there are bigger issues, which are really putting an emphasis back on war fighting as the Department of Defense's mission. There's words really matter, and I think that they've created a culture where they are bound and reacting now to the politically correct narrative as driven by the media and the politicians responding to that media, and that should not be the case. You look back to the Cold War, where the State Department was always infested with leftist thinking. The citadels of national security, the CIA, the FBI, and the Defense Department, even the citadels have now fallen, and so we have to begin to reconstitute them.
I you brought up Brennan there, and he's always been like one of those neon fluorescent snakes. You can see them coming a mile away. And yeah, the Gus Hall voting, a clear communist sympathizer for a long time. But there's other names there too that have shocked us, or at least me, because like I said, I'm a citizen observer of all this stuff. I just take a little bit more of an interest in it. And I was a fan of General Mattis as of a year ago. I loved all of his badass quotes on the internet. I was excited when he was going to become the defense secretary. And then all of a sudden, there he was calling Donald Trump a threat to our democracy. After all the war making that he lived through, Iraq, Afghanistan, the lies that sold and sustained both engagements, I was stunned to realize, oh my God, Mattis too? Was this a surprise to you, Rich?
It wasn't really a surprise to me because I saw how Mattis had entered the administration. Way back during the transition in 2016, and there was a bit of turmoil right after the election. Chris Christie left and Vice President Pence took over, and they brought in some folks, Bill Hagerty, who's currently running for Senate in Tennessee. And Hagerty brought in this guy named John Gallagher, who was a former Army lieutenant colonel. And Gallagher, he basically was emplaced by people from John McCain's office. And Gallagher helped, bring in several people through the national security transition that, legitimately had no right being as part of the Trump administration. So, the public fixates on the spying and FISA and that part of the drama, if you will. There were other things going on. There were, strategic infiltrations being made into key posts. There were systemic leaking going on. There was the disappearing of specific bits of information that, should have been passed from administration to administration. And we know some of the names that show up later, some of the holdovers that were at the NSC. So, no, I was not surprised by some of the rhetoric we received from Mattis. And as a matter of fact, I watched as General Mattis systematically excluded anybody who had been affiliated with helping Trump get elected in the first place from any positions in the Pentagon.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Now, I see that's... like I said, one of those rug pulled out from under me kind of moments as an outsider, and it was kind of disturbing. But at the same time, and now I understand it's probably had something to do with the reason why we are still dragging our feet in wrapping up our engagements out there militarily. And I don't know. There's so much more I wanted to ask there too. But there's one person that keeps coming up for me, Rich, and man, I hope that you got some juice on this one here, and that's Ezra Cohen Watnick. Now, I have been obsessed with reading everything I can about this guy, and you have something in common with him that H.R. McMaster both forced you out of your positions. And I've been reading everything I can about this guy. He was removed by the same guy who pushed you out, 3 or 4 years younger than I am. So I'm 35. He's a couple of years younger than me. He was a protege of Michael Flynn and brought in to serve the president's senior director as the president's senior director for intelligence programs at age 31. But soon after found himself working at the DOJ with Jeff Sessions. Can you tell me why this guy is so dangerous at such a young age?
I can tell you. He may not like me telling you, but I'm going to tell you anyways. He's very private, and the reason he had been brought into the National Security Council at such a senior position is because General Flynn, as the National Security Advisor, had some designs on what he wanted the intelligence community to be more focused upon. And he wanted a very effective staff officer who could write well, staff the memos, communicate effectively, and Ezra fit the bill. So where Ezra was too junior perhaps to have that position, when he's dealing with people 20 years as senior, General Flynn would have basically been helping run that directorate, paying more attention to it than perhaps a normal national security advisor would have. And it was General Flynn who tasked him to go back and audit the FISA books. And so as the FBI did their thing and Strzok and Comey, chased Flynn off and basically got Sessions to recuse, Ezra continued his mission. And shortly, probably 2 or 3 days after Flynn had left. So, that was around February 14th, 13th, around that time frame. Probably on the 17th or 18th, it was Ezra who first found Samantha Power's unmaskings. And, that led to her briefings around the White House and, of course, the infamous March 2nd, wiretapped tweet where, people said that, President Trump was a conspiracy theorist. And, so he kind of got the ball rolling, if you will, by following through on the mission that General Flynn had given him. And go ahead.
No. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
And this set him crosswise with some very powerful and influential people, obviously. And, the president protected him and kept him in there until such time as, when General Kelly came in the personnel churn there, General McMaster used the opportunity in selling to General Kelly, never telling him that the president had told him to protect him, used that opportunity to say, well, I want control of my own people, and basically ran Ezra out. But I'm sure McMaster knew that Ezra and I and a few other folks were working together to try and roll up what was happening. In hindsight, it's just, I think Ezra was the right guy at the right time because, he stuck to what General Flynn had given him to do, and he brought in the appropriate reinforcements when the time was right. I mean, he reached out to the legal office. He brought over, several folks from the Hill and just kind of made sure they understood, hey, we're not seeing things here. Is this even possible? It was that shocking. And, about that same time frame in March, I began working on the memo because it was clear to me that there was an operation being run against. But this was, again, 3.5 years ago. We had never heard of Peter Strzok. We had never heard of Crossfire Hurricane. We had never heard of Crossfire Razor and all the activities that were going on around Flynn. It was clear to us, though, in watching the interaction of the staff and watching the operations roll out around us that, we were being targeted. And I think Ezra is one of those guys that just, he stays true to the Constitution. I mean, one of the things that bothers me is so often they say, well, these guys are loyalists to Flynn or these guys are loyalists to Trump. And no, we're not. We're loyalists to the president because he's the president. And whether or not you like the individual doesn't really matter. You respect the office. You respect the power of that office, right? And this is why I have such heartburn with so many of these people. They've somehow personalized their opinions of the president. I was no big fan of Obama, but I wasn't going to do this stuff to him. It's really quite frightening when these senior officers like that believe that they can act in that way.
Oh yeah, I was talking about the former the president's former. It was an acting DHS head. What was her name from 2017? She's covered in the Daily Mail today talking about how she torpedoed the president's action against DACA because she just had an opinion, a difference of opinion on the whole thing. And with you bringing up Ezra again, because once again it's a guy that we really followed around, and because there's so little on it, we thought he was just like a top level protege spook that he's 31 years old, he must be a prodigy here. But you said that he was working on FISA stuff. I know that there was a dispelled rumor that he was the one that brought all of the unmasking stuff to the attention of Devin Nunes. But shortly after he was pushed out of the White House, he went over to pretty much shadow Jeff Sessions. And it was shortly after that we found out the leaking at the SSCI with James Wolfe and the FISA applications, that the pretty much the barium meal that they pushed on through there. Was he sent over there as a leak hunter?
No, he was not, and I'll clear that up for you. He was directed over to Sessions staff, but Tashina Gahar and some of the other folks in DOJ basically slow-rolled him for so long that he ended up never taking a position in there. And he also isn't the one who brought it to Nunes, but through other folks that were had time on the Hill and knew to go to Nunes as the head of the HIPC. It really is kind of there's so much rumor out there about the way this whole thing, kind of unfolded. I'm hoping to help with some of that. I actually have a book in pre-publication review right now at the White House that I'm hoping to get out later this summer that will help dispel some of the mythology around the operations that went down. Laid out over a timeline. It's a far more ingestible series of events, and the tack I take is to kind of lay it out in the context of a military/intelligence operation. So you see it for what it is, and then we remove some of the guesswork for people. And the challenge I think that Bill Barr has right now, and the challenge that John Durham has, is these guys were operating so far outside of the normal processes and procedures, the whole time covering their tracks with eyewash and disinformation, that getting to the actual facts of the matter on everything that happened is requiring a pretty substantial analytical lift, because the project in and of itself that they ran against the president, both to stop his election in the first place and then to spy on him when he was the president, was so enormous, involving hundreds of assets and dozens and dozens of people, some witting, some not.
Well, since you brought him up, let me just ask you then, John Durham, even those who are hoping for mass arrests and all that, they still fall into, one way or another, even on Fox News, I keep seeing the same old lower thirds on the screen, that trap of describing U.S. Attorney John Durham's current assignment as the creation of some kind of a report that is forthcoming. Could you please remind the audience what he's actually working on, and especially if you have any kind of insight as to how big of an impact this is going to be, if you've heard any rumors or whatever, because I know it's not a report. I know if he's going to bring anything forward, it's going to be indictments. But can you give anybody a little bit more of a focused scope? And if you have any rumors, we'd love to hear them.
I think that, first off, I think that there's a very good chance, no guarantee, there's a very good chance that you'll start to see indictments in the next several weeks. I read Senator Grassley's statement of a week or two ago as basically kind of a nudge from the Senate Judiciary saying, hey, get this stuff moving, because we don't want it to just look like we're dropping, political October surprises. I mean, this is too serious for that. So, my hope is that before the Senate recesses this summer, which is, I think, around August 15th, we'll see some initial indictments. But the scale of this, just think about it. It started out as looking at the predication on the Crossfire Hurricane, spying operation on the campaign. Were they working with the Russians? And then I think as Barr and Durham got into it, they realized, wow, they continued the mission into the Trump administration itself, going so far as to renew the FISA application several times during the Trump administration. So, you're spying on the president when he's the president. And then, then I think they realized the absolute debacle and shameful exercise that the Mueller team was, which was basically a rear guard action, a cover-up crew, if you will, protecting their retreat. I think so. Yeah, I think last I checked, Durham has 4 other U.S. attorneys that are reporting to him. That's unheard of. That is a massive investigation and huge in its scale. And I can tell you that people talk often about how he didn't close the books on the black site, and the interrogation stuff with the CIA, and they talk about how he only indicted 1 or 2 FBI agents in Boston. But the reality is, he is going to get to what factually happened. And my guess is if there is any criminality in there, they will bring indictments. But I think it's really important that the American public know what happened. There's just too much confusion. There's too much disinformation and misinformation out there right now, enabled as almost a co-conspirator by the mainstream media. And if we can just get that truth in check, it would be wonderful. I think Durham himself. I can tell you, a friend of mine was a target of one of his investigations. You read between the lines on where he worked. And he told me, I would not wish Durham on my worst enemy.
Oh, well, that's
he
good.
he is relentless, and he will not stop until he till he has you. And largely the reason that I think that the interrogation issue went away is because both political parties knew in that time period after 9/11 that they'd kind of outrun the rule book, if you will, right? And so they didn't want to see these bureaucrats paying for what the politicals had largely been pushing for. And candidly, the American public was demanding that we not have another 9/11. I don't think we have that this time. I don't think there's any sort of bipartisan consensus that what Comey and Yates and those guys did was acceptable. So we'll see what Mr. Durham's able to turn up.
Well, we'll see. I mean, you mentioned the public needing to know. I've been that actually came up in the opening tonight when I was going through a couple of the highlights that I made of your POTUS and Political Warfare memo from May of 2017, and I thought it was so important what you were talking about with the pretty much unchecked media that has been able to go on out there and craft not just a narrative, but craft reality for so many Americans, for so many countless Americans out there who are actually still trusting in the integrity of whatever is being put out on the airwaves, whether it be television or some other medium like radio, whatever the hell it is. And I always said that, even if the wheels of justice turn slowly, like with what the meticulous nature of John Durham's work, even if that is turning slowly, there's got to be something to keep the people in the loop of what really is going on there. Do you think that there is just irreparable damage that has been done to the overall psyche of the common American with all the time that the media has been able to lie about Russia, about the president's character, about everything else? There's been no pushback whatsoever except playing to their rules. Do you think that that's irreparable at this point?
I think that the media, the legacy media, as we understood it, is gone. Right. I mean, I'm hoping that programs like yours, some of the folks on the useful blogs that you see, are able to retain their freedom of action and their freedom of maneuver. Because candidly, I'm very concerned about what I see coming out of Silicon Valley. Right. The Bolsheviks were able to take over the Soviet Union because they controlled Moscow, and by controlling Moscow, they controlled the trains. And so they were able to move a much smaller force around the country to engage in the battles as they needed to. In today's information warfare domain, Silicon Valley is a center of gravity. It's a center of power. And right now it is wholly owned by the other side. So I'm less concerned, I guess, about the legacy media because I think most Americans, certainly most Americans under the age of 50, know they're being propagandized relentlessly. And so they take that with a grain of salt. I'm far more concerned about what I see going on in Silicon Valley.
Well, then I guess the last question I would ask you is kind of like a spin-off of this one, and that is, I always say that one of the more disheartening things for me as a citizen observer of all of this is that we keep meeting people like Lieutenant Colonel Vindman or Marie Yovanovitch or the entire team that plotted against Mike Flynn at the FBI, but there seems to be no sure way to ever really get an accounting of the good people. We're always seeing the bad come up to the surface, and it's ugly and it smells terrible. But when one person like you pops their head up, they get hammered and smeared. What can you say to people at home who are we're all trying to get an assessment of the good that is there? What can you say about the unseen patriots on the inside, and do they have a fighting chance to win this war?
I think that the unseen patriots inside of the bureaucracy exist that ranks below the threshold which the media would consider them. And when you get somebody that's a little bit uppity like me, they try and make an example of me. But I was talking to a good friend of mine earlier today, and he's a Vietnam vet, and he was talking about he was up guarding an airfield in a hospital when the Tet Offensive hit, and he had a 75-man platoon there, and they were attacked coming down off of a mountain by about 2,000 NVA regulars. And so, these 75 guys knew, well, we're outnumbered 30 to 1 or something. We're going to die, but, we got the hospital here. We got all these wounded here. The nurses are here. Dig in and let's fight. And so they dug in, and as the NVA came down the hill, the firefight started, and just out of nowhere, 2 Marine Corps Cobra gunships showed up and just started laying waste to the NVA coming down the hill and forced them into a retreat after just ravaging them for 10 minutes with 20 millimeter. And I think the lesson there is, there are certain guys out there, and there are a lot of us, who are going to dig into those foxholes come what may. And, I think the American public needs to know that there are a lot of us, both currently serving and former, who are more than prepared.
Well, Rich, next time you come on, we have to talk more inspiring tales from the past, from bygone generations like that, because I think that's exactly what we need right there. I feel real good right now. I want you to go out and fight the fight, man.
All right, Frank. Well, hey, you're sitting in the foxhole next to me, buddy.
Well, Rich, thank you so much for this tonight. We're gonna talk to you soon, and I'd love to have you back. And we're big supporters of you over here, quite frankly. And if there's anything you want to plug, I have your Twitter handle up on the screen the entire time so people know where to find you. But if there's anything that you want to direct people toward, anything that you're currently writing, anything that you want to bring attention to, please let everybody know.
All right, Frank. Thank you.
All right. Well, take care. I guess he didn't want it. It was Rich Higgins _ DC.